I can start. The audiences, I mean, we are doing what I call helping the choir sing for the most part. And I actually believe that there's kind of a misunderstanding of how change happens in the world. Everyone's always saying, oh, don't preach to the choir, as if that's a bad thing. But the people that are most committed to making change in the world are the people that are on the front lines of the most struggle, the most setbacks. So our community partners are organizations that are often led by formerly incarcerated people, often women of color, and they are fighting for this change, and they need to have their stories told, and they need the power of collective witness and the power of what this theater, you know, what I see it inspire in system impacted people again and again is just the feeling of being seen, being heard, and being felt, which is what we say in our engagement piece when people share afterwards, which for me is and AJ couldn't have said it better about just the turmoil of the road, but then once we're on stage, it's like absolute beauty every time. It's the closest I've ever come to making music, what we do together every night on stage. It's like we're one organism. And it's also horrible because I play a horrible person, the prison guard named Officer Miller, and it takes its toll. But the beauty of being able to do that with these professionals overrides the difficulty every time. And the audience responds to that. And then in the engagement piece, we hear, a lot of people there's people that don't have direct experience are shocked and often don't know what to say. So there is like a kind of two-pronged response that we see depending on the experience in the audience. You want to add to that, AJ?
Sure. I'll go back to the one thing that totally stood out. So I use an inordinate amount of profanity as my character, which is seeped into my life. But at the end of one engagement circle, I dropped an F-bomb and I did a call and response with it. And when I turned around, there is this very mature woman of our age, right? To which you would not have thought she was gonna let loose. Oh my gosh, you should have seen the smile on her face when she's just ear to ear. So it invokes a response I got when I looked at her. I saw the child, the young woman, and the activist in her activating. So those are the joys. And that's one memory that will stick with me until I'm her age.
I want to say our last audience in Washington, D.C. was the greatest for me so far this trip, and you guys got a hard act to follow. Because
sounds like a challenge was issued.
We had a cameraman using an old-fashioned shutter type camera, right? Dude, that entire performance, click, word, click. And it's like, it's driving me nuts. I want to be like Patty LuPone and run up to the guy and just slash him out of his freaking hands, right? But no, I stuck to what I was there to do, just like Anthony said. I mean, we were just feeding off of each other, and then in the end, the audience was one of those most beautiful groups of people I've ever met until I meet the next group of beautiful people.
Tonight, right? I'm glad you took my. I'm going to skip my last question and stuff and turn things open to Q&A on our last question. So on the media, maybe I'll actually shuttle the mic around. If anybody has a question that they'd like to direct in any direction, I'll show of hands and I'll run the mic over to you. There we go. All right.
Hi, my name's Gamma. I'm from Madison, Wisconsin. So I have a friend, a loved one, who's serving a life sentence in a Texas prison. and regularly faces solitary confinement. And after doing my research and hearing her story, I believe she was wrongly accused. I'm wondering, as a general question, as people who aren't journalists or lawyers who don't have the lived experience, how can we support people who are incarcerated and in those situations?
Somebody want to help with that? Yeah.
So, how do you support someone in that circumstance situation? You're doing it. Don't think that the little things don't matter. But if you want to do something gigantic, go visit. Seeing you, knowing that that effort has been put forth. A letter means you took time out of your day. Don't look for huge things to do, right? Write a letter. Say I love you. Say I miss you. Ask what's going on. And then here's one thing. Share what's going on in your life. Good, bad, or indifferent.
Yeah, that is the worst thing, is the disconnection. Right? We are social beings, human beings, and we cut off. Solitary is that torture. Meant to be with other people. It all falls apart. So thank you for supporting your friend, and anybody else who writes a postcard. We have postcards to prisoners to write to after every performance. That is important to keep people connected, keeps us alive. Now, there are many Innocence Project organizations across the country. If that your friend is innocent, you want to go that extra mile, write one of those organizations and say, please look at his case. That's about all I get.
I just feel called to add something really briefly because it didn't come up in the Q&A, but as an organization, our stance is that all of prison is a form of solitary confinement. We don't only advocate for, writing to people in solitary confinement, but incarcerated people across the board are experiencing the same core worldview, which is that cutting people off from their loved ones, from any resources that might help them to get better, to be accountable for the harm they might have done in the world, to to heal and get back in the world. That all of our prison is based on that principle, that punishment and isolation will rehabilitate people, and that's not what we believe.
Which is if your relative or friend, I don't remember what you said, if you really think there's an innocence case there, I would do more than just write an innocence project in Texas. I would keep after them because from inside prison, it's pretty hard to reach out and make phone calls, but you can keep after the Innocence Project that you get in touch with. And I would reach out to journalists in Texas and also keep after them, because people give up because they don't hear back from a lawyer, or they don't hear back from a journalist. And of course, all these projects have hundreds of cases that they're looking at, but the squeaky, keep after them, that will help.
One other quick question, Sarah. I scribbled down on my paper early in this conversation. You used the term legislative art. Could you, especially for my students who are taking this class called The Arts and Democracy, where we're looking at any number of ways that the arts can intersect with democratic life, democratic action. Could you talk a little more about what you mean by that term?
Yeah, this whole tour is based on the principle of legislative theater, legislative art, going to the places where there are laws that have been penned, that either have been passed but aren't being enforced, which is very common because our prisons operate with so much impunity and no accountability. So in some places there's been a law, which I believe there's a law that's been passed in North Carolina that is not being implemented well. In other places, the laws haven't been passed yet, but it's all about how can we elevate what people are doing on the front lines. And right now, there is a piece of legislation in California which has absolutely taken us all by surprise because it's just ripping through the legislation that would ban solitary confinement in accordance to international law, which are the Mandela Standards. The United Nations have standards that are in honor, named in honor of Nelson Mandela, and the international standard is 14 days at the very last resort when all other measures have been taken, and that anything more than that can cause lasting brain damage in any individuals, especially juveniles. So those are does that answer your question? That's what we're looking for. But the question for me is, if this does pass in California and 2 states have already banned solitary confinement and many more have limited it for vulnerable populations, I'm curious, in the larger picture, as a strategy, does banning solitary confinement force change in our prison system? Because reforms have often backfired when it comes to fighting the carceral state. They're often replaced by some other punishment. And that's the problem that we always highlight, that you can't just end solitary confinement without it being in alignment with decarceration. I don't know if people are familiar with that word, decarceration. It's just what it sounds like. It's getting people out of prison. We have far too many people in our prisons. In my opinion, the vast majority of them don't need to be there. They're there for crimes of poverty, addiction, mental illness. These are not crimes. These are things that should be treated at the root and addressed as a society instead of punishing individuals. So the less people that we have in prison overall, the less people are going to be tortured in solitary confinement. The best way to end torture is to decarcerate.
Absolutely. Just wait for the mic.
Which is this whole idea that we need both the arts and this emotional response and stories and an emotional way of understanding these issues, but we also need facts and information. And one of the ongoing problems with reforming the criminal legal system is that we have lost so much journalism in this country, and most of the laws having to do with criminal justice reform are passed in state legislatures, not in Congress. And we've lost so much state house reporting, and so what legislatures are doing is being done without public accountability. So I hope that all of you who are young can also make an effort to support local journalism and read local news, and also demand that news organizations start covering what's happening in the state legislatures, because as citizens, we can't go and find that stuff out. We need journalists to do that.
All right, we have a question back here.
Thank you. My name is Kismet Loftonville. I'm with Forsyth Tech Community College on Phi Theta Kappa Honor Society, and I have several students that are online. That's why I asked you all to speak through the mic, and I appreciate it. So the question that came through, what opportunities are available as far as education or training when someone is incarcerated, and is there a difference as it relates to being in solitary confinement? Like, are there resources taken away when they're in solitary confinement, aside from the socialization piece?
The answer is in a short term. If you're in general population, you have your television, you have writing equipment, you can go out to the yard, you can do this, you can do that. I mean, it's almost like going to Disneyland. But when you're in the hole, things get dark, attitudes are dark, correctional officers are dark. Your mind starts to fold in on itself, so you become dark. The only reprieve you have is if you are fighting something, then you're able to go to a law library. So then your mind opens up a little bit and you think, oh, badass word. It's one of my favorites. So yeah, you get stripped when you go into the hole. And your mind, when it folds in, then you become animalistic because everybody is a suspect who is trying to hurt you. And you don't realize that you're doing a lot of harm in yourself. And that's how, as Ms. Short says, you become tortured, right? So with that, yes, there is a big difference. It is huge because you feel like when I came out of the hole, and I went to the hole because I had the audacity to try to sue the warden for embezzlement. At the time, it seemed like a really good idea. A couple weeks in the hole, I was like, shit, what did I really do? So when I came out of the hole, it felt like being reborn. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
We know that we have a lot of private correctional. Right up to it? Really? Jeepers, that's close. My experience is that I hate remote learning. When I was on lockdown in Soledad prison in 1985, 1986, we had inmate council for higher education where we would go into class if we weren't on lockdown. If we were on TV, well, you didn't have that same interaction in the classroom. So you guys have been through a couple of years of remote learning and you hate it. and I'm not, you know, if somebody wants to dispute that, fine. But that's what the corporations want. They want to disconnect, and certain politicians, they want to keep the system as it is. And they'll throw a reform out like, oh, they could use these iPads or something and connect with learning that way. And anything that disconnects you with people is going to cause you pain and torture. Okay, so don't think that this is, a pill somebody can take. Don't take what the marketers and the private corporations are trying to sell as palliative, right? So yeah, we have to decarcerate to lower the suffering, get rid of it.
Yeah, I just want to add to that educational opportunities and grants for prisoners across the country have been gutted in the last 20 years. What was the famous one, John and AJ, do you remember?
Pell Grant.
The Pell Grant was taken away. There are studies that show, because a lot of people ask, so what's the alternative to solitary confinement? Which I think that is the wrong question, because if you're doing something that already has the opposite effect of what it says it is supposed to be doing, which is making prisons safer or reducing violence in prisons, studies show that solitary confinement, the more it's used, violence goes up in prisons. And it attacks the frontal lobe. So people that already might not have, are in a condition where they don't have, in conditions where they don't have a lot of options for positive ways to respond to conflict, are then put in a situation, the condition of solitary confinement, that attacks the part of your brain that helps you make good decisions. So solitary confinement does the opposite thing. If you take it away, violence will go down in prisons. And the way to make violence go down even further is to give prisoners and incarcerated people any opportunity to fill their time in positive ways and constructive ways to help build a better future for themselves. That's what brings conflict down. That's what brings violence down inside prisons, is more resources and more opportunities.
Thanks. Another question. Dean and Rachel.
I was just wondering, AJ, you said such a powerful thing. You said the pencil was the most important tool I had in prison. And so I'm wondering if you all can talk, you're in a room full of artists. If you can talk about the power of art to keep you connected to your humanity while you were incarcerated. I don't know if that's a loaded question, but I see both of you as really brilliant artists. And so
This is awesome.
Jay Fonda hasn't got anything on you, brother. So, yes, poetry, the rhyme. You will find more rappers in prison than you can imagine. And some of them are very talented. Pen and paper. It starts here, it travels through the body, it hits the paper, and it bounces back up into the body. It is one of the releases, escapes that I had while I was in prison. I've got a crap ton of books, plays, poetry, and by the grace of California, I started when it said CDC, California Corrections. I was fortunate that they added an R, rehabilitation. Education is key in prison. It's part of the way that you get to escape the cell. So there's ESL learning. There is the PIA system. And gentlemen, women, people do have the opportunity to evolve a skill set. But there's nothing, and I mean nothing for me, than picking up the pen, picking up the pencil, and writing a feeling, trying to elaborate on that feeling, which causes you to pick up a dictionary, which causes you to, go even further into what that word actually means, the etymology of the word. And now you're traveling into space or into somebody's heart. So it's truly the tool that helped with my liberation.
John, yeah, I was hoping you would speak to this as well.
I want to bring back to what Phoebe said about supporting journalism. Put it right to my mouth. I want to go back to what Phoebe said about supporting journalism. That needs to be supported. But when you're a writer, of course, you need to read other writers. So for me, I was inspired by a writer who died in World War I, around the age of 25, Julian Grenfell. He wrote a poem, Into Battle, that kind of convinced me that I shouldn't, just write a first draft. Right? I mean, a first draft is a seed. Okay, so just a quote from his poem, Into Battle. The blackbird sings to him, brother, brother, if this be the last song you shall sing, sing well, for you may not sing another. Brother, sing. Right, so those words kind of went into me, right? Because I may not sing another, and the words have to be that valuable to me when I put them down on paper. I have to make them that valuable. I have to give them that quality. So read some other writers and be inspired.
Forrest, could you say a little bit about what your sense of the importance of writing was to Darrow?
Yes, so when he was first arrested, the man who organized his defense committee, he was a city councilman at the time, Larry Little, gave him a journal to start writing in. And also at the time, Darrell Hunt had dropped out of school at a young age, so he was not completely illiterate, but he was kind of functionally illiterate. So his Larry Little and his attorney also brought him a lot of books, and he pretty much taught himself to read fluently on his own while he was in prison. Actually, while he was in jail before he was convicted with a dictionary, and he would look up words that he didn't know, write them out many times over, and teach himself to read. And in fact, one of his friends who I met through Ayub, they met when they knew each other, but they were in jail together in the early 90s. And he also did not know how to read, and Daryl taught him to read by giving him a John Grisham novel and a pad of paper and a pen or a pencil and the dictionary, and had him write down every word he came to that he didn't know. So think of this is a very laborious way to learn to read. And he taught other people to read, I presume because he knew the value, the intellectual and emotional and spiritual value of being able to read while you're incarcerated.
Yeah, for me, writing was proof that I still existed. I was in solitary confinement for almost 9 months before I got a pen and a piece of paper, and it was what AJ said. Funny when you're on stage, all of a sudden I get called Miss Short and I call him Anthony. Yeah, what AJ said about feeling like you become an animal in those conditions. I mean, after 8 or 9 months in a box, in a cage, I was just crouched by the food slot in the door, hungry for any sound from the outside world, starved for some kind of breath of information to connect me to something beyond my own suffering and terror. And being able to write for the first time, I remember my whole life coming back to me. Like, oh, I'm a UC Berkeley graduate. I wrote essays. I can articulate ideas. I have my own ideas. So the power of writing is literally like the power to define yourself. So it's an honor to be in a room with so many creative people that are storytellers.
Great, thanks. Anybody else back here?
Is there any language around incarceration or incarcerated people that you all feel is outdated? And if so, do you have any better options for us to start adding into our vocabulary?
Ex-con versus returned citizen. I was given that in 2015. I am now a returned citizen. That led me to volunteer for a politician in San Francisco. And now I can't stop getting text messages from the Democratic Party because yes, I knocked on doors for 2-3 elections in San Francisco, right? Because I take that seriously.
Well, you already used incarcerated people or incarcerated person versus inmate or even prisoner. And that's definitely what I've heard is preferred by people across the map. System impacted people, I think, is also a really powerful term. I'm a torture survivor. I'm formerly incarcerated, but I am the farthest thing from system impacted in this country. And a profound difference for me is when I got out of prison, I never had to fear going back. And unless I go back to Iran, which I will most certainly go back to prison if I'm in Iran, that's never going to happen to me. I mean, it's a very tiny. I mean, it's possible, of course. It's possible that any of us could, but I'm not targeted in this country, and I'm free from the clause and the eternal restrictions that the system of the carceral state imposes on people that have ever been inside.
Would you pose your question again?
Yeah. So, is there any language around incarceration people updated, and what are better options for us?
Take a look. Trend. That's the language. Period. Thank you. It's a great question. Any other questions? All right, coming for you, Jay.
You talked a bit about science may not change people's beliefs, but stories can. Could you talk just a little bit about, as you're shaping material, that relationship between kind of facts and stories? Phoebe Zurich, you talked about how you told the story, but you realized that initially that we wanted a story of redemption and forgiveness, and that may have gotten it wrong. What are the considerations when you're shaping this kind of material about a well-developed story, but then does that get it right?
Huge question.
I heard PB's name, so I'll hand you the mic.
Yeah, so that is a great question, and I think I struggled with it all the way through writing this book. So first of all, I needed to get the story right, and I wasn't telling my own story, right? I was telling the stories of other people. So I worked kind of relentlessly to get the facts right, even when I was telling stories that were about life and emotions, and the way to get at that through nonfiction storytelling is through the details. And so every detail in the book that gets to something emotional, I worked really hard to get those facts right. And then in terms of shaping it, I don't know how to answer that. I shaped it in a pretty traditional way, which is, beginning to end narrative, as opposed to lots of back and forth in time. And then I also wanted to weave in enough facts so that the story was supported by all the context. So there's lots of history in here, lots of public policy, lots of facts and figures about, medical studies on the impact of incarceration and solitary confinement, lots of facts and figures about what happens after somebody is a returned citizen, and how really once you've been convicted of a crime, in many ways your citizenship is stripped from you forever. So there's so much that you can't do once you have a felony conviction on your record. So many, you can't find a job, you can't get into a lot of rental situations, you can't apply for your pension, you can't apply for a loan. Some places you can't become a barber or get a license to do all kinds of things. So I'm going off the topic a little bit, but I looked for facts and studies and policy that would support this emotional theme that I was working on, which was to get at what it feels like even coming home to be stripped of citizenship. I hope that answers what we were asking about.
Yeah, I think with the ethics of storytelling, when they're based on real stories and true stories, my approach is definitely to just being rigorous about at every stage. 3 years of investigation. All of the people that I wrote and visited in prisons around the country are contributors, and they're named in the playbill on the website. All of them got to read the play and give me feedback and make suggestions. I was very clear from the beginning that any mistakes are my own, and all of the beauty that is in the play comes from people with lived experience. That said, no matter how rigorous I am, I'm still a white person telling a story and creating characters of Black and brown men whose lives I can never understand completely without the blinders that my own whiteness puts on that. So as an anti-racist, the only way that I can address that is to have a lot of people with lived experience read the play, give me feedback, again, integrate it. And that's one of the strengths of theater, is that you perform over and over again. The play is like a living document. Every time every production we've done, it's been shaped by formerly incarcerated actors, by people in the audience with lived experience. But one of the things that came up in this production is just a huge question, ethical question, I think, for me as a white person that's a storyteller, is the use of the N-word. It does appear in the play, and it came out of the rehearsing with people with lived experience, asking people with lived experience, is this how it would be said? Is this the word you would use? But it's a profound question. Is that my tool to use as the author? Or is it enough to say that, oh, all these other people contributed to it? And I question actually whether I should have co-written this play with a person of color. Would that have been a more powerful thing? Would that have been a way to fill in some of the gaps and blind spots presented by my own limits as a white person?
Absolutely.
So I'm so glad you raised that topic. Yeah, I struggled with clearly this idea of whether a middle-aged white woman can tell the story of a Black man, and also even whether it was even fair to tell a story that my subject, our Hunt, was no longer here to tell. And so I finally concluded that it was, but I'm open to challenge on that point. But I also went through some of the same rigorous methodology that you just described, Sarah, in asking people for feedback and really being rigorous about the facts. And I would say I'm a little envious of both the opportunity for constant revision that theater provides you and the opportunity for collaboration, because writing a book is essentially finally a solitary act, and to be able to work with other people and revise and perform, I think must be a beautiful experience.
So I'm looking at my watch and realizing that here at UNC we end the Tuesday, Thursday morning period at 9:50, and so we're up against the clock. And so I think I'm going to need to end the conversation there. I do want to, before I say our final round of thanks and allow you to show your appreciation for our panelists, want to mention two things. One, I want to again point to Ann Peters, who's going to raise her hand higher than that, and as the one to walk over to and claim a ticket. Yes.
And if you do not get a chance to get in touch with me, community comp is the password that you need to put on at the Ramcat ticketing.
Go to ramcat.com or whichever one it is. Find the show on the night that you want. Go all the way down to the bottom where there's a place you can put codes. Right, community comp, capital C on both words.
I think it all.
And also email me and your instructors if you're here with an instructor, have that information as well. I also should say that I know that the End of Isolation tour would appreciate donations or financial support. So if you go to the endofisolation.org, you'll find, I think, buttons you can hit and make contributions if you're moved to do so. I want to mention that. And finally, I want to just say to the panelists, thank you on behalf of the UNCSA Division of Liberal Arts and Muse Winston-Salem, how much we appreciate you being here, especially at this early hour. Phoebe, thank you on behalf of, I think, our whole community for writing, for the work you did 2 decades ago and for the book you've written this year. It's available at your favorite bookseller, whether that be Bookmarks downtown. Yes, of course it is, or something more evil and corporate elsewhere. You can buy the book. And it is a fantastic read. I highly recommend it. This has been so interesting, and John in particular, I met you first a few months ago online, and now you're here, and thankful that you are. It's been so powerful to learn about and the mic is telling me wrap it up right here. And so finally, please join me in thanking our panelists. Thanks, everybody.